Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates.
Hello, this is Janice.
Today we talk with Janice Lobo Sapigao. She's a writer, teacher, and the current Santa Clara County Poet Laureate. Hey Janice, this is Daniel. Thank you for taking time to be on the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, and thank you for meeting me at Roy's a few weeks ago to do the video and the photos for the issue and content.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yeah, I still haven't seen the video that you all posted. I think I'll watch it in maybe like a month from now.
Okay. Is that the like the time flow that you allow for things to be out there before you
Yes.
let it sink in?
Yeah, like
I
I'll maybe watch I think I watched the first 5 seconds and I thought, okay, maybe I'll watch the next 10 later on and 15. I'll just incrementally watch the video until I'll tell myself I have completed it and then I'll know it's okay. It's like watching it with like one eye open, you know?
Okay. Yeah, it's only like 40 seconds, so I think it shouldn't be that painful. And the
Okay.
majority of time I think it's pictures of your hands typing. So,
Oh, perfect. Then I'll watch it.
yeah, cool. So, yeah, it was great to kind of meet you in that kind of short moment. So, I wanted to do a podcast just to get more in depth of all the wonderful things that you're doing.
Mm,
Um, Specifically, I just wanted to even like from the article that Johanna did,
mhm.
I saw that you call yourself a documentarian poetics, or how would you
Oh,
describe your style? What would you say? It's
yeah.
documentary.
I think I was talking to her about the first 2 books the only 2 books that I've published, and,
Well, the
I
first
was
two, if this is somebody listens in 5 years, yeah,
you're right, there will be more.
yeah.
I was telling her that both of the books are written from, what's called documentary poetics, and so documentary poetics is very similar to documentary film, where a single narrative is created from multiple narratives, so it includes scholarship and personal experiences, interviews, headlines, things like that. And so it sort of takes from like multiple different sources and allows it to either tell a multiplicity of a narrative or to tell like a single one. So I really that's how I think. Like I think a lot of my knowledge and experiences are sort of like filtered through different ways of like sensing,
Hmm.
and I wanted my poetry to convey not only like what I have to say with words, but also with like visuals. So I want to create like visual poetry, or sometimes I play with space and fragments. And so in that way, I would say that I'm a documentary poet. But
Yeah,
there are so many, by the way, like it's not just like me, like there are so many out there. So,
yeah, that's cool. So then, how does that different than say a different style of poetics or poems or writing?
hmm.
What would be the other forms?
Yeah, I think it's just one approach, like one of many approaches. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about a lot of the classes, like writing classes I took in graduate school. I got my MFA in writing, and I just learned like so many different ways. Like, there can be like a poetics of youth, or like a poetics of the Bay Area, or like Filipino poetics. Like, I think
Yeah.
those are some of the different ways that sort of like, um, I don't want to say like privilege, but they allow like a certain subjectivity to come through.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that's just the one that allowed me to sort of like write and speak and say so many different things from different perspectives, and I wanted to kind of play with that. I think a lot of the books I had read up until I started reading and like doing documentary poetics were just sort of like straight up like free verse. I
Hmm.
listened to a lot of spoken word also, and so the of performativity of voice and text like really stand out to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just thought that would be like the best one that would fit me.
Yeah. That's cool. So then, how would you say, like, how did you really get into writing and get a passion for writing? When did that kind of begin for your life?
Yeah, that I really started writing when I was 6. when I was 6 years old,
Yeah.
I I wanted a diary. And so I
Sure.
remember like my mom drove me to Eastridge Mall
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
on Easter Sunday, and we that was when like malls were closed on Easter,
Yeah.
and this is also like pre-pandemic, so
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Now they're closed all the time. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And we just wanted to go. I just really wanted to go to Sanrio in Eastridge Mall, but they were closed, so we went back the following week. And once she bought me a diary, I just like filled that thing up, and then she bought me another one. I filled that up too, and I
Wow.
think I traced a lot of that desire to write to when my dad passed away. My
Yeah.
dad passed away from a heart attack when I was 6, and so maybe like a couple of months later, um actually no, maybe like less than a month later, my dad passed away in on March 11th.
Okay.
I think it was 1994, and Easter was just around the corner, so I think to me, like I think I had obsessed about getting a diary because I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to like tell people. So I think
Right.
a lot of where that comes from is just wanting to say things that are very personal and emotional, and poetry really fits all of those things for me.
Yeah. So then I imagine it's kind of starting out that way. I mean, you were keeping them in your diary, kind of more for your own kind of process, right? And kind of
Mhm.
like health and healing. When does that change then where you were like, I'm going to say this out loud or I'm going to let someone else read it? When did that kind of happen? And how
Oh,
scary was that?
yeah, much later, very scary. I think it was when I was maybe like when I was in college for sure.
Yeah.
I went to college at UC San Diego, and I had a friend and who would just like who also loved poetry and loved spoken word poetry. So we would do whatever we could to sort of like get our hands on listening to new spoken word poems.
Oh, cool.
And I feel like we sort of missed the tail end of I don't know, like the explosion of Asian American spoken word artists
Yeah.
in the early 2000s who were really like on so many poetry scenes. So many poetry collectives had come out of the early 2000s, and we were just kind of like looking for those artists and learning that history and yearning for those words. So my friend and I would switch off on buying spoken word CDs,
Oh, cool.
and so I remember I think the first one that he bought is my friend Alex. By the way, we're still kind of like acquaintances today. So
That's
Alex
cool.
bought a spoken word album by a group called Yellow Rage. Have you heard of Yellow Rage?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh man, they're so great. They're so
Okay.
great. And they're out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they had articulated this sort of awakening and consciousness and anger of what it meant to be Asian American. And we started listening to them.
Yeah.
When they were on tour, sometimes they would come to California and specifically Los Angeles. So we drove from like
Oh,
San
cool.
Diego to Los Angeles just to go see them.
Yeah.
There's a spoken word collective in the early 2000s called I Was Born with Two Tongues,
Oh,
and
cool.
they're out of Chicago, Illinois. And their album has now been digitized, so it's available on SoundCloud. That album really changed my life and helped me understand what poetry could do, not only for like Asian American activism, but like what spoken word could do in terms of like um, putting into action some of the things that I was then learning in my ethnic studies classes in college. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the concepts that I was learning in these books was suddenly becoming more descriptive and actionable by listening to
Yeah.
the poetry. And so yeah, like I think after listening to a lot of people, that's when I realized, well, maybe I should try something like this.
Yeah.
And I'm really bad at memorizing, and so I thought, maybe not necessarily spoken word, but to read in a way that is still full of life and is still
Yeah.
full of emotion. And so that moment came maybe in like 2010. That's like 10 years
Oh,
ago.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then do you remember that first time you stood at was it like an open mic experience or something like that, or
Oh my gosh, yes, in college. That was like in 2009, I think, or 8. But I in college I did a couple of open mics and I didn't comfortably read in front of people until like 2010, but I do
yeah.
remember the first open mic I ever did and I just I feel like I stood up there and cried.
Oh, was it did you cry because well, I imagine with nervousness, and then what was the piece that
Mhm.
you were reading, like a personal emotional one too, and so that kind of
Mm,
amplified it, or was it you just
yeah.
so scared you cried?
It was that, and the content of that poem was about, it was a letter I had written to a friend about, how her contemplating suicide had affected
Oh.
me and our friendship.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and, like, I think that time in my life, like, being in college and just, like, learning more about identity and myself and my values, that really all started to come together at that
Yeah,
age for me. And I was also like just struggling with maintaining friendships, like living in San Diego as a young person and then keeping friendships at home,
yeah,
in the Bay Area, like that distance, like I felt that distance
sure.
every time I had a conversation with someone from like, back home.
Yeah,
And I had learned in college, like college was really like a great awakening for me. And I think it should be and could be that for so many people.
yeah.
And that's when I learned that Filipino Americans contemplate suicide at a higher rate than
Really?
Filipino men.
Oh,
Yeah, that was sort of like a public health issue that broke open in the early '90s,
wow.
and I didn't realize that until I got to college and was reading about, like this.
Yeah,
There was a seminal article that came out in the San Diego Union Tribune about Filipino American suicide. And then I thought, wow, even that headline just tells me so much about my life and my like Filipino American friends. So
yeah.
that was
What
the content of that poem that day.
wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
What can I just ask you? I mean, I'm sorry that I'm not up on, you know,
Hmm.
Filipino culture like that, but what is the reason for that? What's kind of like some of
Yeah.
the, causes for that
Hmm.
high stat?
Um, there, I guess I'm gonna like cite my sources.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
And so there is a documentary that's called Silent Sacrifices. And it was created by a Filipino American doctor. I think she's like a psychologist who interviewed the children of a family and then the parents of that family, like two
Yeah.
separate interviews. And then we can just sort of see the cultural differences, like definitely like the psychology and mental health of migration, of language barriers,
Mm-hmm.
of like poverty, all of those things sort of manifest for Filipino Americans and Filipino women in particular because they are expected to like fulfill a lot of these like familial roles without necessarily
Sure.
being said. And I
Yeah.
think that's to me is like a very Filipino thing, like the fact that we have to know what to do in any moment without it being said.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that has sort of been like a huge burden in so many ways. And so I think growing up, like I just didn't know necessarily how to speak to my parents. And a lot of like, I had two Filipino American friends growing up. And even they didn't know how to talk to their parents because we
Yeah.
didn't know how to talk to each other
Oh,
about
wow.
some of the like very emotional, deep seated issues about like self worth, self confidence,
Yeah.
dating, relationships, our
Yeah.
relationships to men and boys at the time. Like a lot of that just goes unsaid. And
Yeah.
so I think it sort of like culminates and results in these like sort of suicidal contemplations. And so when I read that headline, I thought about those two friends and
Yeah.
the conversations that we did and did not have growing up.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So just
yeah.
that, I mean, that's the thing, right? Just the isolation, right? Not having
Mm-hmm.
someone to speak to, talk to, bounce ideas off of,
Mm-hmm.
share your soul with. Do you think for you then, I mean, like, So writing in your diary was very much that kind of like place that you could go to then, do you think?
Yeah. I think writing and music, like just listening to music, because there was a period of my life, like maybe in middle school, which is to me like that was the most awkward time I had ever been myself.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
I think it's for most people, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, right. Like that, like awkwardness plus trying to figure out all these things. Like a lot of the language that I use to talk about myself and identity and like, even like community, like, those words were not necessarily part of my vocabulary when I was younger.
Sure, yeah.
And so I think that also made things difficult. And listening to music is what would kind of allow me to even express some kind of emotion that was related to what I was feeling if it wasn't the thing itself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
I remember that. Oh wow, I haven't talked about this in a while, Daniel. Like this is like I mean, I feel like I'm still young in some ways, but this is like my work. In terms of my work, this is like OG stuff for my
Yeah,
work.
okay, yeah. Well, let's get to that because, it's
Mm,
interesting to hear you say that in the kind of this pivotal time, and I think everybody has it, like, college well, junior high is difficult, high
mhm,
school is difficult, college is that kinda like the it's kind of a dual-edged thing. In some ways, it's like you begin to be looking at the world in a new way, getting more information,
mhm.
and at the same time, like, kind of a lot of the things that you thought were true aren't true. The rubber's kind of hitting the road and can be kind of this, time of,
Yeah.
change. So
Mhm,
it seems like you've kind of had that type of experience too, but now you're working with teens in a lot,
mhm.
right? Or even college age students.
Yes.
Do you
Mhm,
and how did that come about? And do you think there's a little bit of your own story and need, I don't want to say need, but self health and
mm.
growth that is connected to that?
Yeah, totally. I do think so. I when I graduated from college, it was the Great Recession.
Yeah.
No one in my family had a job except my older brother.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Um, he was working at the Bill Wilson Center off the Alameda, and
Yeah.
he was the only one working and just sort of like supporting all of us, everybody else.
Wow.
And it was during that time that I realized and learned that if I take college classes at De Anza, then I would not have to pay back my student loans.
Oh,
And
okay. Yeah.
so when I started taking classes at De Anza, I realized, oh wow, like this is what a community college is. Like this is what it means, like to be in a class with people who are so much older or different, or to be taught by people who are like close in age or even like
Yeah.
much older. Like one of my professors at De Anza was like one of the first female Catholic priests in the
Oh,
area.
wow. Oh,
And I
wow.
just thought, wow, and that was for an early childhood ed class, you know?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I
Interesting.
just remember thinking like this is community right here. Like this is what so many people had always talked about when I was at UC San Diego, but here it is like actually happening around me.
Yeah.
And so that to me was a really inspiring experience. And I thought, if I am going to go and get my master's, I would eventually love to teach at a community college. And
Yeah.
so that's sort of what led me to teaching at Skyline College now, where I work full time.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of being a teacher or community college instructor is really unlearning. It is teaching and unlearning. Like, I think a lot of people, and including myself, thought like if we had been successful for some time in some way, it means that like other people have to go through the ringer in the same way that we did.
Sure.
And I think that's actually sort of like a response to like white supremacy and what it means to be successful in very white educational spaces.
Hmm.
And then I realized, what if I just go into this classroom as who I am? What if I just
Right.
go in there listening to students as who they are? Then we can really come up with something, some community that is like really meaningful and special and like will only last for that time that we're in the class together. Like
Yeah.
that's sort of been my approach, because I think before I had a lot to prove and
Mhm.
I felt like I had to teach in a certain way that was like strict or maybe like assignment heavy or reading
Right.
heavy. And I realized, but that's not necessarily all that people need. Like, why not
Yeah.
sort of work with what is needed in the classroom at that time. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it has been
That's cool.
really great teaching.
Yeah.
And I want to teach until like I feel like I have nothing else to share, or if I don't have the energy anymore, because I think sometimes that's where teachers might fail, is if
Yeah.
we teach and we don't have that energy or the like strength to kind of like change. Like I think at
Yeah.
that point I might be useless, and so
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience where you have the teacher or the professor who's taught the
mm,
same thing so much it's just like automatic pilot for them rather than engaging. Yeah.
mhm,
So then
yeah.
what is it what courses are you teaching that these
I
finishes?
teach English courses, so English composition, um, introduction to literature, and I'm also the honors program coordinator at Skyline College. So I
Awesome.
also teach an honors research seminar, which has been really exciting. I love like introducing students to the world of academic research because
Yeah.
I don't think it is as daunting as like any institution would want it to be.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing. Even what you're talking about, like you're saying, the way that you approach your class.
Hmm.
I think things like even like something like research. The moment you say research, people get already
Freaked
get
out.
bored,
Yes.
and tune out and think of like moldy, smelly books, right, in the archives of the basement of the library. But
Yes.
actually, if you think of it as like discovery, right,
Mhm, yes.
and
Hmm.
then the curiosity, and then that becomes exciting. Like, wow, I didn't
Yeah.
know this, right? That aha moment.
Yes, oh my gosh, I, like, want to clap. Yes, Daniel, that's exactly it. I
That's what I
think
love.
that's been my approach, and I actually think that, a lot of the research I did in college is what allowed me to be a better poet
Yeah, yeah,
and
sure.
now a better teacher because I understand like to me like research and poetry is also about like exploring the different ends of a question.
Yeah.
Like if a research question, actually like some of my students have amazing research questions. Like one of them is about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and like what
Oh,
can
yeah.
chemically be done.
Hmm.
And I just think that's so amazing.
Yeah.
And, like that really is about like personal inquiry. And so the student is looking at it from a chemical perspective, which I think is super important. And even though like I'm not a chemistry professor, I really like that the workshop serves students from so many different disciplines.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, like everyone in the class will be able to think about that question. Like, what about public health? And what about other cities? Um,
Yeah.
the research really kind of becomes like a collective inquiry, and I think of poems in the same way.
Yeah.
Like I'll just have an idea of what I want to write about, and then every line is like an answer to try to get it to a place where it can sort of exist in its fullness.
Yeah.
Even if it's not necessarily answered, it just sort of exists in that way. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah.
cool. I mean, when you think of just like, I mean, that's the crazy thing about, especially like writing or even poets, writers, and I even
Hmm.
think like, well, anybody who's doing art and even comics, right?
Hmm.
It's the kind of like the wealth of information and experience that they have that bring out the nuance, right?
Yes.
I
Hmm.
mean, like, I could never be a poet because my vocabulary is too small.
No,
You know, it
I
would be
disagree.
yeah, yeah, well, so, that's kinda interesting, and the research becomes a part of it. So, did you see when you were younger, writing in your diary,
Mhm.
before you went to college and kind of started kinda seeing the kind of like the spoken word, uh, were you reading a lot too at that same time? Or what, how did you get the appreciation for words? Was it more just kind of out of your own writing and it morphed, or did you were already reading and, eating up a book a day or something like that?
When I was in elementary school, I read like all of the Babysitters Club's books.
Okay.
All of them, every single one. My mom invested in like a subscription,
Yeah.
and they would send like the publisher would send me like 4 books a day, or 4 books a month,
4
and I would
books a
actually
day.
read them all. Yeah, sorry, I meant to
Yeah,
say.
that would be funny. That'd be
I
crazy.
know.
Yeah.
I did read 4 in one day once because I
Oh,
was so
wow.
into it, and
Yeah.
then when I got to middle school, I actually stopped reading and writing for fun or for myself, because I learned that it wasn't cool. So
Sure, you got into music, right? And then
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I think that's why I got into music because I realized, well, if I don't know what I want to read or write, I can listen to people who have decided what they want to read and write. So
Yeah, yeah.
and then like I don't know, in high school, I don't remember writing really being something I did. It was always something I wanted to do, but I guess I always thought like the bounds of writing were either, writing captions for a yearbook or joining the journalism class, which
Right.
is an elective that doesn't count towards like
Right.
CSU or UC requirements. So
Right, right.
I was like, "Oh, so then maybe this is not the place to invest." And I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do for a career for maybe like a huge part of my life. I just knew I should go to college. I should go and learn. I should get a job, and then
So then
um
what was your when you went off to San Diego, what was your major? Like, what did you declare as your major at first?
my major was initially it was sociology, and
Okay.
then I took an ethnic studies class, and I was like, this is it. This is what I
Oh,
want
cool.
to study. And I didn't know necessarily what career that would translate into, but I just sort of, I don't know if this sounds really strange, Daniel, but I always had like faith. Like I always
Yeah,
believed that I would be okay. And
sure.
I don't know if that's because I don't know, maybe it's because of like I realized that I did grow up in a very like stable environment. Like my parents were there.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk much, but they were always there.
So
And
even though you maybe didn't communicate it, you
mhm,
knew that you were loved and there was
mhm,
somewhat of a safety net to for lack of a better term?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I
okay.
think that's it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So then because it seems like even what you're doing now, and we can get into that a little bit, but
Hmm.
the idea of kind of like advocacy and the power of
Hmm.
words and poems and writing have kind of meshed into your life, right?
Yes. Hmm.
So talk about the relationship between uh let's just say let's call it advocacy, I guess, or
Yeah.
and poetry and words. What's
Yes.
your thoughts on that?
I think, yeah, I feel like I can tie it all together with what we've talked about with like writing and research and working with students. So like right now as the county poet laureate, my project is to start the county's youth poet laureate program.
Yeah,
And I'm really excited to say it's like up and running. We need students to apply.
sure.
The opportunity is there. And, right now I'm just in the process of like working with a small team to get the word out.
And
And,
this is for high school age, like
oh,
13 to 19 or something, or
yeah,
what's the age frame that you guys are looking at?
ages 13 to 18.
Okay.
So eighth graders to maybe like juniors, and early seniors in high school.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, I think like the advocacy for youth, I like intentionally set out to make sure that when I do this work, that I'm like really focusing on youth because, to be honest, I didn't want a lot of like old white male poets to come up
Yeah.
to me and ask me things like, "So have you read anything? Have you written anything I've read?" As if
Oh,
I'm supposed to know what they've read, you know? Like
sure, sure,
I just
sure.
I want to be very intentional about who I work with so that people cannot expect me to like serve so many people.
Yeah,
And I think that has sort of like just like sort of like opened the door for me to continue to do that work.
yeah,
And I chose to advocate for youth. Well, one, I just think it's important. Two, youth are like super energetic.
yeah.
And they bring me so much hope
Right,
and
right.
I don't know, like they're so great, and I think a lot of it is this is tied to research because when I was doing my undergraduate research, it was focused specifically on youth culture,
Yeah,
and from that I learned that youth are a very vulnerable population because a lot of them under 18 cannot vote, right? So we disempower youth politically, and then
yeah,
a lot of them can't work until they're maybe like 16 or 17. So then
yeah,
we disempower them economically. And what are the ways then that we are listening to our youth if they can't vote to tell us what they think, and then if they can't make money to like spend it wherever they think is like important,
yeah,
then really we're not serving them. And so
yeah,
I think that poetry can be the way where we start to really listen, where we can start to like be challenged. And I think a lot of adults think, since we're older, as if that means something, right? Like that
yeah,
we know more. And I just don't think that's true. I mean,
yeah,
how many
yeah,
adults have we met or put into positions of power who don't know anything? Like
yeah, yeah,
every day we have an example of someone new. And so
yeah.
that's why I decided to advocate for youth with this particular position.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because I think what age does is you've either tricked yourself in
Yes.
thinking that you have a method that is functional,
Hmm. Hmm.
or you actually have found a method that works for you that's functional. You know what I mean? So it's
Yes.
kind of funny. I mean, like, because you could see people that older folks that are doing things and you're like, yeah, and you could ask, is that really working for you though? Are you really happy? Are you really satisfied? You know, but that's the great about youth and like is that they don't know, they haven't been restricted in what
Mm-hmm.
isn't like what's not possible. So let's
Hmm.
try it. Let's think about it. So it must be really, life giving for you, right?
Yeah, it is.
Does that affect then you think even your writing?
Um, that's a good question. I guess I'm thinking now about like my first book, Microchips for Millions, is
Yeah.
definitely written from like so like in poetry, the narrator is called the speaker, and arguably the speaker is different from the author. Even though
Yeah.
yes, like
Sure.
I'm the speaker, yes, I'm the author, but
Yeah.
also like to me the speaker is a very like it occupies like one time in my life, so the
Yeah.
speaker is writing as a daughter whose mother is still alive, or as a daughter whose mother is still alive and going to work.
Yeah.
And so for me, like that's not necessarily the case anymore. And so like anyway, what I mean by that is like it's sort of like a still, like the speaker is a still, like in a movie frame.
Sure.
And so a lot of the some of the like conversations I had heard or been a part of when my first book came out, people were wondering like, oh, is this a younger speaker? Is this like a
Right.
younger self? And then I think sometimes they would conflate the younger self with me just being young.
Right.
I think I have a youthful energy, but I don't
Sure.
always
Sure.
identify with being young.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's sort of like my approach.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Well, yeah, yeah. So I guess what you're saying is like, so then writing gives you the opportunity to have different viewpoints, like you
Mhm,
were kind of saying even earlier, like different viewpoints and different voices that you can bring
mhm,
in. So you could have an overall narrative voice or whatever it is background that's
mhm,
youthful, but it still could be written by somebody who's older that might have some different kind of experience, right? Is that
mhm.
kind of what you're saying? Like,
Yeah, like
yeah,
the subjectivity is younger,
yeah,
but like it doesn't mean that I am.
sure,
And so I guess like because I understand that um importance of like seeing something from a younger person's point of view, I think
yeah,
it has made its way into my writing in that way, but it hasn't necessarily made its way into my writing as like someone who is writing for youth or about youth. Like
right,
that
okay,
that part has not happened for me yet.
yeah.
Um, but actually, is that true, Janice? Hold on.
Yeah, right. Check yourself here.
I know. Yeah, I don't know if that's true
Well,
though
I
because
how do you really yeah, how do you really subjectively say or
Mhm.
objectively say or whichever, like, "Oh, and this is my influences and this is why." I mean, to a point we could do it, right? But then there's
Yeah.
also so
Mhm.
many other things that we don't know about till a couple years later. But I would say, like,
Mhm.
probably I would think, because 'cause I've worked with, youth and college kids and stuff like that before, and
Mhm.
I think what it does is just it does give you that, the energy like you were talking about,
Mhm.
and then I think a way of, like, looking at problems differently, right?
Mm,
So
yes.
maybe you don't say the same words or do the same things, but it does give you a sense of, like, "Wait a minute, why have we always done it that way?"
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
do you think you approach your writing in that way of, like, "Why does this have to be written like that?" Are you more
Mhm.
of a technical yeah, how do you approach even, like, the stylistic way of what's the space between the words and when you return to the next paragraph and those kinda things?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good question. Wow. Um, I guess I think about that now. I'm doing NaNoWriMo. Have you heard of NaNoWriMo?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, it's a shorthand way of saying National Novel Writing Month.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
so
I gotta write that
every
down.
November is NaNoWriMo, and
Oh,
yeah, I've chosen to do NaNoWriMo this month with like a small writing group. And every day I am returning to the story that I have written, for the past few weeks.
yeah,
And I am finding it difficult to sort of like enter the story every single time.
right,
Like right now, one of the chapters I'm working on is about a mailman. And, we don't often think about mailmen for longer than when they bring us our mail and when they leave.
right, yeah,
And so it's been really interesting to sort of like follow a mailman, or they call themselves mail carriers. So
right,
to
yeah. I was gonna
follow,
say, like, the language has even changed of
yes,
yeah, yeah,
exactly, right? So now I have to like inhabit this like internal space, which is so unlike anything I've lived. But I do find that difficulty, but I also think like that strangely excites me about writing. Like I get to come to the page new every single time, and then like the character gets to like come back into my life and tell me things.
yeah, yeah,
So really, I think like the work of writing is really a lot about imagination and like
yeah,
exploring how the imagination can take us towards or into new spaces. And
yeah,
so I feel like if anyone does that really well, it's our youth.
yeah,
And
imagination,
and
yeah, yeah,
in literature, it would be like young adult literature. Like they're just like YA is such an amazing category.
yeah,
Um, and so I don't know. I guess I just think of it in that way. Like writing is like it brings that energy, and I see that as akin to like a youthful energy, where
yeah,
it's like never ending.
yeah, yeah. What would you say then, who's been some of your biggest influences as far as, like, um, the way that you write or the way either that really has inspired you?
Hmm, that's a great question. I feel like maybe like a couple of years ago, if you asked me this question, I would have just listed off all the people whose books I love.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but I feel like I'm approaching writing so differently these days because I'm wondering which writers are also great organizers
okay,
and which
sure.
ones are also like publishing work every now and then. So that way they can sort of like share what they're working on. So who influences me?
Would you say
Um,
while you're thinking about that,
mhm.
do you say that's because you've kinda changed in your kinda career now? It's not just so much reading for to read, but there's a little bit of it. I don't wanna say the business of it, but the career of it? Do you think so then
Yeah,
now you're kinda seeing like, "Oh, this writer not only is a great writer, but they have these other skill sets?" Do you think that's kinda what's
yes.
happening with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna know if, like, the poet is a good person.
Oh, well, yeah, that's important. Yeah, yeah,
So that's a question I've been asking myself because I meet a lot of poets at readings, and I meet people, who, like, admire really amazing or even popular and famous poets, and
yeah,
sometimes I just wonder why. Like, why do they like that person a lot?
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, I've been thinking about it in that way. So who are some people, and I also want to like follow and like keep up with people who somehow incorporate that sense of organizing and like the future, like a sense of the future
Oh,
in their work too.
yeah, that's cool.
Um and so I don't know, is this cheating if I like name one of my friends? Like
No, that's not cheating.
I know, I read this article that said most people who thrive in art, it's because they have, really good friends who
That's cool.
uphold their names, but, yeah, the people I admire, so I have a friend, named Monica Sok, who is a, Cambodian poet. I just love the way that she like moves around the poetry world and is able to navigate while still being very truthful to her family, her culture,
Yeah,
and also just is like not afraid as a woman of color to like say no to people, like to say no to opportunities, to
yeah,
walk away from things like prestigious fellowships just to preserve a sense of peace that is like way like 100 times more meaningful than taking on the name of this like institutional abuse guys as a fellowship, you know.
yeah, yeah,
So I really admire her, and she does a lot of great work with anti-deportation in the Cambodian American community. She teaches youth writing workshops, so I don't know if she knows how much I admire her, but I definitely do.
yeah. That's awesome.
um,
What's her
yeah.
name again? You said what was her name?
Oh, Monica Sok.
Monica
Her last
Sox.
name is spelled S-O-K.
Okay.
I love her a lot. And let's see. Yeah, she's one person I could think of.
Yeah.
There are a lot of great Asian American artists who organize also as part of Kearney Street Workshop in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
So like Jason Bayani, Michelle Lin, Kazumi Chin, those are all amazing poets who like constantly create space for more poets. So I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
admire that. I don't know
Yeah.
if they know how much I admire them too.
That's cool.
Um, yeah, those are just a few that I could
Yeah,
think
that's good.
of.
That's good.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing too. So now, because somewhat of your career, your trajectory is so there's obviously the aspect of working with youth, even or teens. I don't know what I should call
Mhm,
them,
mhm,
um, young adults, and then even writing kind of like I guess a young adult book, and then but also creating space for other poets for the next generation for people to do that,
mhm,
and that's part of the job with being the Santa Clara Poet Laureate, correct? Is that
mhm,
the idea
mhm.
of that? And so you are going to be launching, or you have launched the first youth poet laureate program. That's the for Santa Clara County. That's the plan, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And then people can get involved in that. How? What's would be the best way?
Oh, if they are teachers, they could tell their students. If they are part of nonprofits, they could invite me or other people from the
Hmm.
organizing team to present. If they are the youth specifically, they could apply on the Youth Poet Laureate website. It is SCC, like Santa Clara County, sccyouth.laureate.com.
Yeah.
And there
Awesome.
is an application as well as like program details on there. And we have our Youth Poet Laureate program kickoff event with it's hosted with the Santa Clara County Library District, and that is on Friday, December 4th from 5 to 7 p.m. And you can view it on Facebook on the Santa Clara County Library District's page. It'll be
Yeah.
there streaming live. So,
That's awesome. So
yeah.
for you, so becoming the Santa Clara County Poet Laureate,
Mhm.
um, what has what has been the biggest shock or surprise of that
Mm.
title and that position?
Um, so there yeah, I could think of 2 things. Well, one, like, I don't know if I told you this, Daniel. I'm sure it came out maybe, but yeah, my mom passed away in April of this
Yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah,
And so that was a big shock because like I'm always thinking of like yes, I'm poet laureate, but how do I also tie like who I am like to this
yeah,
role? And I'm also like someone who just lost her mom, you know,
yeah,
so I find it really important to just like constantly like share where I'm at and what I'm feeling. And so
yeah,
that was a really big shock because Well, one, like, I found out that I was the poet laureate, like, almost, like, a year ago during this time, right
Yeah.
before Thanksgiving. I found out when I was on the phone in the Kaiser Santa Clara Homestead parking lot.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I was
Yeah.
with my mom, we were picking up a prescription, it was taking a little while, and then I got a phone call, and it was, like,
Yeah.
great news, but I was also, like, just really sad.
Yeah.
And then in February when I was, like, sworn in or whatever that's called with the Santa Clara County
Yeah.
supervisor, when they selected me, I went to my mom's house first that day, and she lives really close to downtown San Jose, and so I really wanted her to come, but she just like physically like could not be brought,
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
wheelchair, to a car, to a building. Like it just wasn't feasible. Um, so I think about that, and
Yeah.
um, I guess that has sort of been very surprising. And
Yeah.
I think the other surprising thing is that it's this position has been maybe like more politics than poetry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been someone said that I feel like a poetician, and I was like,
A
that's it.
poet a poetician, I like that.
Yes.
So is that like they're sending you a memo, say, a piece of please write a piece about COVID? Is that or can you do a descriptive, uh, prose about wearing a mask? Or is it that kind of
I
stuff
wish.
or
No, I wish I would get that actually. I hope more people send me requests like that, but, I think it's more like, with putting on the Youth Poet Laureate program, it took a little while to get things started and to get people
Sure.
to really see the vision, and even for myself, I realized like, "Oh, wow, this is actually like creating my own nonprofit,"
Yeah.
and that wasn't part of the dream, but it is part of
Sure.
the dream. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
been some of that, like just meeting with people, and like I'm trying to get school districts to let me present on the program at their board meetings and things like that. So I
yeah,
didn't realize it would be a lot of, just like networking in that way.
yeah.
And it doesn't feel like, I think networking is very different from like community building. And
Sure.
it seems like I have to network in order to community build. So
Yeah, totally.
that's been
Yeah,
unexpected for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So then I guess for you, this part of your story and your history will always be kind of related to your mom's
Mm,
passing, right?
mhm, mhm.
Yeah, so that is kind of like a bittersweet or a crazy
Yeah,
dichotomy, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, and then she passed away in April, so that's right in the middle of COVID too, right?
Yeah, it was like right at the beginning of when we were still trying to understand and abide by different county policies. And yeah, my mom had cancer, and she had been diagnosed 2 years prior. So my family and I were still kind of like, we were preparing ourselves and taking care of her. And
Yeah,
she was mostly just like at home at that time. So
yeah,
I feel like we had a good sense of like the timeline, but like not really, right? Like no one can ever say like what day or what hour, but
right.
yeah, we had time with her, and I feel like the time that like since the time that she's passed, she's still kind of like looking out, like
Yeah,
some like stories will come out, or I'll find things in weird places. And more of my poetry is being published in places I had only dreamed about
hmm,
before. So I
yeah,
just kind of feel like I don't know what she's doing, but
yeah,
I'm really thankful that whatever is happening is probably because she's helping it along. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then what? I mean, that means for like the funeral and stuff like that. Did you have to have a social distance funeral? And
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really difficult too.
That was really tough, and that was when Santa Clara County was only allowing 10 people per funeral, and
Yeah,
that would include the priest. And that was when people still weren't sure how COVID was like specifically
transmitted.
contracted.
Yeah,
Like, is it through services? Is it through the air? Is it through touch? And in what capacity? And so, yeah, I just remember thinking like, at that funeral, I was like sitting away from my family. No one was sitting next to anyone.
yeah,
And just to think about like how kind of like cold that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the same time, still kind of giving it like the warmth of intimacy. Um, and
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
honestly, it was maybe like a blessing in disguise to not have to invite so many people, and not have to talk with so many people in my family. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think like for what it was a really beautiful ceremony for my mom. And um, yeah, like I think part of me is just like, I wish she could have seen it. Like I just wish
Sure.
she could have seen how much time and care and the ideas that she did. But yeah, that was a really tough and strange time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. It's really hard. So, um, what's the best way for me to transition from
Um,
that? I don't want to
mhm,
uh, downplay the importance and the value, but how for you then? I mean, you've said a couple times, even for your classroom,
mhm,
and even you admire that one poet. They show up of who they are, and so I wanted to ask you, like, so who are you? How would you describe if you know, how
ooh,
who are you? Like when
oh
you
man.
come your authentic self.
Mhm. Um, I'm Janice.
Yeah, that's true.
And I I think like who I am today is, ooh, I am a daughter who misses her mother,
Yeah,
who still can't believe that my mom is not here.
yeah,
Um, I am a writer and poet who is like who really sees writing and literature as a lifeline
mm,
and not a hobby.
yeah, yeah,
um, I am um someone who is trying to be very supportive for my brother who is also experiencing this grief with me,
yeah.
um, and my husband whose father passed away maybe like a few months before my mom passed away.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we're just sort of dealing with our grief and parentlessness. And I think I'm someone in quarantine who is just always thinking about like how I'm feeling
Yeah,
and like how to sort of process like the heaviness of some of those feelings.
yeah.
Um, I strongly identify as a Filipino American.
Hmm.
And another identity of mine that I think
Yeah.
has really come up during this time in terms of who I am is just like being a friend. Like I've had some really
Cool.
great conversations with friends during this time who are like also stuck at home, working from home,
Hmm.
managing families from home. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think that part of my identity has really come out. And I'm very thankful for a lot of the conversations I've had
yeah.
with people in my community. So,
That's cool. That's good. Well, thank you. Yeah, and I would say like it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously I don't know you that well. I mean, we've seen each other and we had a little photo shoot, for 30 minutes. Um, But, there's something about you that has, even though in the midst of you talking about your mom and the difficult times of that,
Mhm,
and hearing the loss, but
mhm.
there's still within your voice, there's still like a joy, right? There's still like a
Mm.
happiness you seem to bring to life. And I appreciate that. Just,
Aw.
yeah, even your countenance, the way that you talk has, what I mean? Your inflections have a very kind of like positive, hopeful sound to it, which is kind of cool.
Oh, thanks for saying that. I do love the word joy. Like I just love that word.
Well, you embody it, I think.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I'm gonna think about that for a while.
cool.
Um,
Yeah,
thanks, Daniel.
no problem. Well, thank you for sharing, about your life and your writing, and I really appreciate that and the work that you're doing, to reach out and help the youth even have a voice, right? And
Mhm.
even for them to, like you did, like, for them to maybe take what they're writing in their diaries at home to take it out and connect with the larger community. So appreciate you doing that with the youth
Yes.
for the
Oh,
Poet
that's so
Laureate.
great. So
Yeah.
dreamy. I hope they do that. I hope
I
they do.
hope so too. And they will. And they will. Right?
I have hope. I have
Yes, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you very much. So December 4th is the kind of like
kickoff.
the kickoff. Okay, good.
Yes.
So we'll put links in for that and everything. Like anything else you would like to share, that you're doing for the listeners
Oh,
out there?
I guess it's just to continue about the Youth Poet Laureate program very quickly.
Yeah,
We have there will be four featured readers, one of whom is Jarvis Subia, who is an
sure.
amazing spoken word poet that I know you know.
Yeah, he's cool.
And then we'll also have a young poet who came out of the Milpitas Library, Lilia Zarai.
Awesome.
Another amazing poet, and then Danny Tian Lee, who is a librarian but also kind of daylights as a poet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then our last featured reader for that night will be Greer Nakadagawa Lee, who is the Oakland Youth Poet Laureate.
Oh,
So
awesome. Yeah.
I am super excited to have all four of them together.
So that's Danny is Dan Diggity.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that's him.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. How funny. I was gonna say that, but I didn't know if he still goes by that.
I
So
don't think he does now that he's going to be a serious librarian, right? Which is awesome. I think that's like the perfect kind of trajectory for his life and everything. But yeah,
yes.
cool.
Young
Well,
hero.
thank you,
Yes.
Janice. I really appreciate your time and what you're doing, and hopefully, we'll be able to see each other in person and not just through Zoom calls and all those kind of things in the near
Yes,
future.
I
Yeah,
agree. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
yeah. You're welcome. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
To find out more about Janice, you can go to her website, janicewrites.com, and also her Instagram at JaniceSAP, and also the Instagram Poet Laureate SCC. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is Time Alone by Mild Monk. Follow him on Spotify and also on his Instagram at Mild Monk Music.